And now it's time for the second hour and more of the award-winning California Sportsman with Sepp Hendrickson.
Hey, we're back, and as you well know, this is going to be a different kind of hour for California Sportsmen. I'm not going to list where we're going and what we're doing. This hour, we have special guests in the studio here at KHTK. We're joined by the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Now, get this. Here's who's here, and it's important because today we're going to answer questions that are important to sportsmen and outdoorsmen all over California. We've got the Deputy Director of Fish and Wildlife, Dan Paragari, in the studio. The Chief of the Wildlife Branch, Dr. Eric Loft, is in studio. The Chief of the Fisheries Branch, Stafford Lair, is in studio. And Mike Carrion, the Chief of Law Enforcement, the head of all the game wardens, is joining us too. He's by phone because he's up north right now, but we've got the Brain Trust here in the studio with questions to ask. And the first thing I'd like to talk about right now is the opportunity that the department has offered us. Let's swing over to Dan Paragari real quick just for a second and say, Dan, how does something like this really come together? This is a great opportunity for California sportsmen and our listeners out there to get up to date. And I don't think this has been done too often in the past, but, boy, we're thrilled that you've selected California Sportsmen to get this word out and start talking to the folks.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, Sepp. This kind of follows along those ISE show things we do, and it is important, and we love the opportunity to talk to the folks that care a lot about what we do.
Well, we do. We're always asking questions. I'm sending stuff to a lot of the staff down there asking questions, and it's so nice to get the cooperation and the communication established the way we have here. Now, once again, Dr. Eric Loft is also here. He is the Chief of Wildlife for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And, Eric, there's a lot going on out there. The drought has had a big situation, not only on our fish species, but also in game, hasn't it?
Good morning, Sepp. Yeah, actually, the drought does impact the terrestrial ones. It's a little slower in terms of seeing the impact, but than it is for fish. But certainly, we're very concerned about long-term impacts from drought on terrestrial species.
A lot of deer hunters that are out there right now are and I got a call last night from a guy, hey, I'm going deer hunting. I said, well, if you're going deer hunting, sit still, find some water and park yourself because it's so dry out there. It's quite noisy, I'm sure.
Yeah, dry out there. Low forage availability this time of year. We're concerned, of course, about the fire season coming up. I don't know if we want to get into that right now, but certainly we are concerned about some of those annual closures that our hunters experience on Forest Service lands. Right now, the only one that we're aware of is still a result of the rim fire from last year in the Yosemite area. So we're fearful that there will be more fire closures just because of the dry season. So ask hunters to be watchful of that and where they go. Be very careful when you're out there in the outdoors and what you're doing. Well, we'll get into all of these in more depth as our hour continues. Let's go over to Stafford Lair now in fisheries. Stafford, the drought has certainly got your attention. I'm sure that teams are scrambling all over the state with what's going on. Where are we at with it? How are rescues working right now? And what kind of an impact is this temperature reduction that we're seeing right now going to have?
So right now, Sepp, the rescues that have currently been going on are in three key locations, the San Joaquin, the tributaries to the Klamath, and the north of the gate coastal streams that have sensitive coho. We have seen a reduction in temperatures in the Sacramento, but we were seeing abnormally high numbers of pre-spawn mortality. So the fish are dying before they get to spawn in the tributaries to the Sacramento, mainly in the spring run Chinook. That is a cause of concern for us.
As a listed species.
Yeah, and they are one of the trigger fisheries that the Pacific Fisheries Management Council uses to set quotas. Not only that, the Klamath had our attention. It still has our attention. We're seeing lower temperatures up there, so that'll reduce the risk of an outbreak of disease, plus the flows that the Bureau has agreed to release. So the bottom line, it's a statewide response. We have never seen anything like this in terms of the department responding to it proactively as it's ongoing, and, of course, everything that we're doing at the hatchery facilities, given the budget opportunities that we had.
Well, next I'd like to check in real quick with the Chief of Law Enforcement, Mike Carrion. And, Mike, my question to you is, what has the drought and our low water situation and dryness out there, looking at our waterfowl seasons and our deer seasons, how has that impacted the wardens in the field, and what special problems have you come across?
The drought situation for enforcement has really concentrated on illegal water diversions, that type of problem for our officers. So they're out responding to people taking water where they're not supposed to, and dewatering streams, which are causing problems with concentrating fish, that type of situation. It's also bringing a lot of wildlife down from the mountains into the lower areas. We got bears and lions that are showing up in places they normally have not been before, so we're having a lot of response to bear and lion conflicts with folks in the lower reaches of the state. Our issue with waterfowl is going to be, because there's a lot of birds coming in and not a whole lot of water, we think that we're going to have some really heavy concentrated populations when they do get here. So we're prepared to, figure out where we need to be in order to protect the birds when they get here.
All right, sounds good. Well, Mike, I want you to stick in there. Keep listening for us. We're going to keep checking in with you. He's joining us by phone. He's the only one not in the studio today. So as we continue on our topics today, we'll be checking in with law enforcement and Chief Mike Carrion as we go. Once again, if you've got a question you'd like to send in to us here for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, feel free to call the studio at 800-920-1140. Better yet, send us a text to 44-1140. That's our text message here for the California Sportsman line. We're going to take a quick break right now. When we come back, we're going to get into some depth on these issues and talk to them about even more important issues like Senate Bill 711, Assembly Bill 53, a lot of stuff about guns and lead and all kinds of things that might seem kind of small and trivial right now, but it's just a smaller chunk, a smaller piece of the big chunks that some people are trying to get. We'll talk more in just a couple of minutes. Stick around, call your friends. Let's all get involved in this discussion today. We'll be right back. Guys, we were talking during the break, and one of the things that is kind of surprising was the quick changes that were made in some of the upland game regulations that were out there. And I was kind of surprised that it's all going into effect immediately and in time for this season. Eric Loft, the Chief of Wildlife. Eric, the Eurasian collared doves, I'm shocked that the info got out so fast and we're already able to shoot them. What's going on? Tell our listeners the updates.
Sep, the Eurasian collared dove, ECD as we affectionately refer to it, is, of course, a non-native invasive bird.
And it's a big bird.
It should be easier to shoot. So, yeah, it's done a fantastic job as a non-native of spreading across from Florida to the west and then north. And last year we proposed and initiated a trial year down in Imperial County to open up the season to no limit year-round. And Mike's folks in particular might have been a little concerned. Mike checked around with other states. And we wanted the law enforcement folks to monitor Imperial County for a year, see how it worked out from an enforcement perspective. And Mike can clear us up if there's any misunderstanding. But no issues were identified really, and so we got the okay and support from his group and the rest of the department to propose year-round, statewide, no limit on Eurasian collared dove. We don't anticipate this will be an effective control of the species, but it certainly is a great additional opportunity out there for hunters.
Absolutely. One of the things that the biggest concern, I'm sure, is detection, identification. Which species is it as it's coming in? If you're saying to yourself, that's the biggest dove I've ever seen, it's a Eurasian. You can pretty well bet on it.
Yeah, we've talked about that too. And in fact, the first time you hear one, you go, God, what's that annoying
dog
noise?
in a tree.
Yeah. So that's the other thing. The other important changes too, Sep, that we're hitting on is because of the Fish and Wildlife Service and the western states reevaluating mourning dove and how we're managing that species and doing surveys of it. We've gone to they've reevaluated and indicated that we've been very conservative in our harvest strategies for mourning dove over the years. I think a lot of hunters actually thought that and knew that. So this year we're going to a 15 bird bag limit for mourning dove and actually triple possession limit. So plenty of new and good opportunity out there for mourning dove as well. And again, the concern mourning dove versus Eurasian collared dove. Get online if you're not real clear, but should be fairly easy for hunters to be able to distinguish the two birds.
they're kind of tan with a white wing spread or white tail spread compared to our others that are darker with the grays?
Yeah, and our guys, too, we're going to put some info up on the web with some photographs just for clarification. And I would also tell folks just right now, if you're interested in looking at some of the planned changes coming up here starting September 1, get online, get onto our department webpage, and if you just go into the upper right corner in the search bar and type Early Bird, you'll be able to download the PDF file of our Early Bird flyer, which provides some of the detail there.
Now, all this goes into effect September 1st?
September 1.
Except thinks they all just a black tail flying away.
How
do you identify him? Hey, he's going that way.
I have been surprised lately that there has been so much shotgun shooting out in the country where I live.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, what are these guys shooting at?
They're getting ready, man. They're shooting trap and they're getting ready.
Yeah, they're practicing. They're throwing up dirt clods, I'm sure, out back.
Except, I want to ask Eric, too. I mean, obviously, the very lucrative limits with Dove and this new Eurasian, deal, but also seeing very, very lucrative limits for Canadian honkers, dark geese, and an increase in white geese. Obviously, the white geese are migrating in. They don't live down here, but we seem to have an awful lot of resident Canadians now. We call them country club geese because they live at the golf course. But is that also why we've raised that limit? Those birds are not migrating.
Yeah, and then perfect opportunity for Dan to weigh in here right now, but on the waterfowl. But when I see what the changes are for the geese in California, it's like you're going to need help
carrying them.
So I would turn that over to Dan real quick.
Yeah, thanks. Real quick on the local resident geese. Many guys know that we've added an early season in October as well. We're constricted by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act only 107 days. So if you do something early or do something late, it comes out of what was traditional hunting. So, some guys have been very successful, but, I took the day off yesterday and played golf and could have killed about 100 turkeys and 50 geese. So I don't know if we're going to do much with that either, but that's part of it.
So that's why we can't have a bigger, longer early season. We're limited to the days.
Well, yeah, right. So if you want to take it out of your traditional hunting season and move it early, some states like Oregon have done that to try and address depredation problems. So, there's the trade-off. Take advantage of our local birds, have longer seasons then, but then you got to take it out of the November, December, January period when guys are used to going waterfowl hunting.
Dan, with the drought years or the drought situation that we're in right now, can we expect there to be any water on refuges? Can we expect much water for the waterfowl season?
Well, it's still uncertain, and it's a bit of a mixed bag. South of the Delta, we know it's going to be seriously constrained. North of the Delta, we're expecting right now Gray Lodge to get something like 70% of its water, although there's some issues there with some early water availability that we're going to take. West side of the valley, we're not hearing that the federal refuges are going to be much below 70%. So there's going to be, yes, water on refuges. The thing from the bird standpoint and maybe a hunting standpoint is the rice straw decomposition, the famous Lake Sacramento. Early predictions are go from 300,000 acres of flooded rice to something like 50. So
that's going to slow down some stopping along the road, isn't it?
Well, yeah, maybe. But, here's the thing, and I mentioned this to our commission when we adopted regs in early August. One of the advantages of being old is you've seen some of this stuff before. And this is really a lot like 1976, 77. We didn't have rice straw decomp. We had a lot more ducks then than we do now. I know some hunters might not believe that. We've replaced the ducks with geese, so we have about the same demand on food that we did in the 70s, and the world didn't totally fall apart.
One of the questions that was sent in was by Mike Ogney with USAFishing.com. What is the department doing to work with the Bureau of Reclamation to ensure there's enough water for salmon and wildlife refuges this fall? Specifics, please, not politics, he says.
Yeah, well, I'll let Salmon handle on the fish side. Stafford, I'm sorry, on the fish side. We are meeting, I would tell you, weekly with the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Bureau, DWR, to look at water availability and timing.
Well, that's nice to know that we're paying attention to the whole thing on the fishery side.
On the fishery side, primarily all the discussion right now is management of the cold water pool and the reservoirs to make sure that we do have the amount of cold water for the winter run Chinook that require very cool temperatures. Secondarily is the balancing act that goes amongst all the different reservoirs, and as Dan said, there are weekly meetings. It's called the Real-Time Drought Operations Team, and they're basically looking at a large pie and trying to figure out how they dice it up. is Folsom. We know Folsom is going to be very low as we move into the fall. So we got the two big ones, Oroville and Shasta, and it is a pure balancing act.
Yeah,
and
there's a finite number right now that we're drawing from.
That is correct, and we're very concerned about the effects upon the fall run spawn, because the flows are high right now to allow the winter run to emerge from the gravels, because they spawned just recently. And then when the water starts to run out, they cut the flows. Unfortunately, it's when the fall run are spawning.
There you have it. Kent
Real quick, Dan, back to the rice decomp. And just a question. If the water that goes into rice decomp is pretty much, it sits there for the decomp, but then gets pumped back to the river. So why can't there be more water put towards the rice decomp and waterfowl to spread the birds out, cut cholera, cut a lot of the things? As a duck hunter, I wonder, why we can't do that, since that water really is a 90-day project that gets put back into the system.
So when it comes out of the river, which a lot of it does, it affects the fish on the upper end. So, there's only unfortunately this year, of course, there's only so much water in the system. And you can leave it in the rivers for the fish, or you can put it on the rice for the ducks. That's almost what it comes down to.
And people might be able to even share in some of it, too. That's our situation. As we talked about, we've got a big bowl of water. There's no more water available right now, and we're drawing down this. There'll be water available in a few months. That's fine. But a lot of it's going to get soaked into the groundwater supply, so the initial rainfall and everything isn't going to do us a whole lot for our reservoirs, and I know we've all got our fingers crossed. We're going to take a quick break right now. When we come back, we're going to be talking about some waterfowl limits, and we're also going to be talking about non-lead. That's right. We're going to get into it and find out what's going on with the lead proposal and see about the availability of it, too. We'll talk to you in a minute. Be right back.
And now, more California Sportsmen with Seth Hendrickson.
Hey, welcome back to California Sportsmen. I'm glad you're there and listening this morning. Today, those of you that are new to listening today, we've got a special show. We've got the California Department of Fish and Wildlife panel in studio today. Deputy Director Dan Paragari of Fish and Wildlife is joining us in the studio. Dr. Eric Loft with the Wildlife Division is here, and Stafford Lair with Fisheries joins us. And in addition to that, calling in live on the phone is Mike Carrion, the Chief of Law Enforcement for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. We're asking him questions today that are important to sportsmen. We've been talking about some of the regulations, some of the changes in upland game birds, some of the situations out for waterfowl season that'll be coming up. One of the most important issues, certainly, is AB 711. And the first question that I'm going to ask on AB 711, that's the one banning lead use in California for ammunition. And here is a question from Bill Gaines with Gaines & Associates. And I know you guys have heard this question several times before. We know that the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Commission have been handed the mandate of fully implementing AB 711 no later than July 1st, 2019 by the legislature. We know you have no choice in the matter. But that aside, outside of condors, and many still argue the science there, does the Department of Fish and Wildlife have any scientific proof that lead ammunition is having an impact whatsoever on any other game or non-game species? And I would think that, Dan, that would be you as the Chief of Fisheries and Wildlife for the state.
Yeah, and thanks for letting Bill ask a question. That's what I'm thinking. That stuff comes up all the time. Is there a population level effect? And we can do the analogy game. We were talking about it the other day. It's kind of a bad subject with Ebola going on in Africa right now, but think back to the bird flu epidemics of 1918. Was there a population level effect? I don't know, millions and millions of people died. We talk about, in the office, we talked about seat belts, right? There are things we do. We know lead is toxic. That's undisputed. Right, we took it out of paint.
I think lead is also one of the most common minerals that's on Earth. It is found on the ground. It's found blowing around in the air and a lot of things.
Yes, exactly.
Bad? I'm not sure. I consider it as bad as many people do, and I don't use the rhetoric of, well, we all know lead is bad.
Well, we do. I mean, you can look at the Centers for Disease Control. They will tell you
don't eat lead.
Don't eat lead. Take it out of your pottery. Take it out of your pipes. Take it out of your paint. Don't eat lead. So, on the one hand, Is it going to make a difference? I don't know. Some people might. Well, there's no scientific evidence, but look at the status of waterfowl. We banned the use of lead in waterfowl in 1991, and we've, despite some ups and downs in prairie habitat conditions, we're long on ducks.
There is a learning curve that we all go through, and I'm sure that this non-lead ban that they've got out there is going to be another learning curve. Some people look at it like, hey, all we're doing is switching from lead to ceramic or whatever they end up having. But there's another issue, and it's my issue, and it's just another chip by the antis. The people that are going to the politicians and saying, we don't believe in this, we'll donate money, we've got to get this stopped. And each little chip is just a little chink away from our outdoor heritage and our sporting and all of those things. And I look at it more that way than the lead. I don't mind the shift to the lead. I mind that it's brought up by the Humane Society of the United States, and they're pounding their hands on the desk saying, there's plenty of lead. We've been all through the stores. We've seen there's massive amounts of non-lead ammo available out there. Well, that's truly not accurate. There's some that's available out there, but it isn't all available out there.
Our perspective, we totally agree.
And I see a motivation from a few with a lot of money to change it for everybody. And it just doesn't set well with me. But I know you guys are challenged with having to do this because the legislatures made it all happen.
Yeah, that's correct. But, at the end of the day, I think there is sort of a way to look at this kind of stuff. When we went through this in the waterfowl world, we lost a lot of waterfowl hunters. It also happened at a period of time where we had restrictive regs. But now we're at a point where steel shot is competitive with lead, generally speaking, not the cheap 8s that you might shoot at doves, right? But guys transitioned. It shoots different. So there's a spin to this, or if you want to cut it that bad word maybe, but we can revel around in how bad it is, how woe is us, or we can say sportsmen are the true and original conservationists. Lead is toxic. We're going to find a way to get through this and use it. They developed the
that's what goes on in my head, but I still can't lose that big picture.
Well, I get it, but there's 38 million people in the state and 250,000 of us that choose to hunt and another million that choose to fish. But
I don't really go out and hunt big game either.
Well, one of the things folks forget is, I'll ask Stafford, who's our resident bullet head in the room, but the non-lead bullet that Hornady or Barnes developed first was long before the issue of lead, non-lead came up.
Well, some of these organizations obviously saw that the direction the wind was blowing.
Yeah, well, but the point is that they developed these non-lead bullets because they perform better. I'll let Stafford talk about that. He knows more about it than I do.
Well, we'll get into that a little bit deeper. Just as a follow-up on it, that I don't even know how to bring this up. Let's just say I was contacted and was asked that, do I know anybody that owns stores that would communicate to the Department of Fish and Wildlife about the current situation with lead or non-lead products availabilities. And I helped in putting together a little meeting or two out there. And then just about a week or two later, I see this dealer meeting with California Department of Fish and Wildlife by the National Shooting Sports Foundation, supposedly the mouthpiece for outdoorsmen and gun owners and everybody at the national level, that they don't feel that any of the retailers should be meeting with the Department of Fish and Wildlife until their report comes out on available lead and ammunition or non-lead ammunition. And I'm just sitting here going, how does this separate with HSUS? HSUS is saying don't do this, and now we got NSFF saying don't do this. But we have people working together trying to resolve a problem. I know you guys. I know it isn't your devious method to get around everything. You're trying to find out the truth and find out where we're at. And that's my next question to you. Where are we at with the lead ban right now? Are we going to push this off to 2019, or are we going to be impacted by the politics and the special interest groups that want things handled now?
Yeah, so in terms of just process, the Commission's Wildlife Resources Committee will meet again in September. We're hoping that the NSSF study that they did through Southwick and Associates, a very reputable firm, will provide some better, newer information relative to availability. But in terms of process, we're hoping to get to a point where the department's recommendation has got some general support at the Wildlife Resources Committee and then on to the full process through the Commission. Our starting point proposal has got some probably small changes to it, but where we started, as we've done 14 or 15 around the state meetings, is beginning in 2015, The use of lead for the take of wildlife on wildlife areas and for bighorn sheep is our current starting point proposal would stop in 15. So that means, like, if you're pheasant hunting at Gray Lodge, you'd need to use steel. In 16, we'd go to the take of wildlife with anything you use with a shotgun and common size, waterfowl type loads, because we believe that's widely available. So that's most of the rest of your upland game statewide, pheasants, but not the smaller stuff like quail and doves. Everything else, all the rest of the deer zones, all the rest of the small game, 2019, the last year that the law currently allows.
And I always like to point out, Sep, the reason we're doing that is just because of that topic you talk about, the uncertainty of the availability of that ammunition in the stores.
Exactly. If it's not there, one of the other questions that I would ask, what happens if manufacturers refuse to sell non-lead ammo in California? What if they don't want to manufacture it?
Well, they do. The question is, do they manufacture enough to meet our demand?
Exactly.
That's the real problem.
Yeah, there'll be boxes of ammo available for $250 a box initially.
Well, the supply and
Shoot
demand,
straight,
the American
guys.
market, yeah.
I had a quick question. It was a question of mine and many other people that sent the same thing in. They asked whether this applied to 22s and their kids going out plinking. Rimfire rounds?
Yeah, so that comes up a lot, and it is for the take of wildlife. So if you're out on a range, plinking, as long as you're not taking wildlife, you can continue to use lead.
So leaving lead out in the field is okay if you're just shooting lead, but if you're shooting at game, it's not okay.
That crossed our minds when the bill was being developed.
I would hope, because I think that at a range, guys are shooting like hundreds of thousands of rounds, reaching a saturation point not even remote to out shooting in the wild.
Right. The flip side to that, of course, is that at ranges especially, right, we've got a few on our wildlife areas, there's not a lot of wildlife value to a place that's disturbed.
Yeah, and a lot of places do mining of that lead. You go down to guns fishing and other stuff, for example. They had the gun range was closed, and I go, what's going on? Oh, they're mining. Mm-hmm. Mining for what? Lead. And he told me how much they collect in lead, and I went, wow. Yeah. They just go in there and get all the pads and everything that's the backdrop and recirculate it.
Sep, I think it'd be important to talk to Mike about the enforcement aspect of this.
Mr. Carry-On, I have a question right here for you. And it says, how are you guys going to enforce this law without infringing on a hunter's constitutional rights? Currently, you've stated in public that you do not have the ability or the technology to check if ammo contains lead or not without destroying it or buying a $10,000 piece of equipment that can scan the ammo. Chief Carry-On, what's your response to that?
So that's the problem that we have right now, is that we don't have any kind of a testing mechanism that's available that we can distribute out to our officers. In talking to the people that have created some of the testing methodologies that we have for shotgun ammunition, they are working on getting some kind of a test available, and they believe if they have enough time, they will be able to get something available for us. That's another reason for us pushing that recommendation out to 2019. Without a tool to test that ammunition in the field, what we have to rely on is, what does the box that the ammunition came out of say? Is it listed as a non-lead alternative? And, the only other thing we have right now for a field test is some of these rounds have hollow tips on them, and, we've had officers using pins to see if it's soft, indicating there's lead in the core, and if not, then we assume that there is no lead in it. But it's very primitive as far as rifle pistol ammunition.
Well, thank you for the update on that. We appreciate it. One of the follow-ups here that Bill Gaines had, he said, to that end, at the commission meeting, Commission's Wildlife Resources Committee meeting in July, a PhD out of Canada hired by the Humane Society of the United States gave a presentation on a study he had done for the sponsors of the bill for HSUS. And he said that the ammunition was already readily available in California in near all common calibers and loads at reasonable prices. Several retailers in the audience immediately challenged those findings. I understand that the department and the commission have done their unofficial checking around, and I know some of you guys have participated in that. Are your findings, when you're talking to the retailers, similar in any fashion to the findings of the Humane Society of the United States expert?
Sep, no. The answer is no, Eric. And, seeing the presentation, it was very interesting, and we learned a bit, but I think many of us were surprised that his on average 30% of the stores, et cetera, had lead available to us, we don't feel that that's a success. I mean, these are stores that cater to hunters, and only 30% of them had the non-lead stuff even available on average.
Yeah, and I'm sure you talked to them whether it was even orderable.
And then then further, we've gone back too with some of our surveys and looking at elsewhere, and I'm sure NSSF stuff will come in too, where just the availability just is not there, either online. You're back ordered on everything. It's made, and I think that's the big issue again. It's available in the market, but it's not available at the store, and it's not available for purchase right now. A lot of it is back ordered.
A lot of it is probably wishful thinking too.
Yeah,
in placing those orders.
Except this Stafford. I think that one of the big concerns is hunters shoot a lot of different calibers. And while you may walk into store A and they might have 6 or 7 boxes of non-lead 30-06, they don't have the range or variability of types. And as we know, one bullet may shoot fine in someone's rifle, or another one may not shoot fine. So it's not just about having a couple of boxes on the shelves. It's about having enough boxes to meet the demand in enough different varieties so that people can be able to work with it and learn to shoot it. The bottom line is if there's only 3 boxes on the shelf, it's not available.
If there's 3 boxes on the shelf, one guy's taking them. That's the way it works. When I walk in, I shoot squirrels, ground squirrels, and 17 caliber HMRs, and I have a wonderful time doing it. The worst part of going out and shooting is trying to find adequate supply of 17 caliber ammo. We had a little lull in the action a while back. Well, I ran out and bought. And at one day, I went down to Guns Fishing the other stuff, and I said, do you have any more 17s? And they said, no, we just got a few boxes. I said, you want to buy some? Because I load up when I go in for 17. I'll buy 3,000-4,000 rounds. I will look like the biggest criminal in the world if they pass this registration to buy ammo problem or situation that's coming up that we'll probably talk about in a little bit. It's changing, folks. It's a change in California. We have to go along with the change because they're being pushed at us. However, you've already heard the answer. HSUS says it's there. The Department of Fish and Wildlife clearly has said, no, lead is not there. The question then comes to the effect, here's one from Sam Paratus with Gun Owners of California. Will the director use the discretionary power granted to him by AB 711 to exempt all calibers of ammunition legal for hunting use for which there is no or very limited non-lead ammunition available? Dan, I'm sure that one will go to the deputy director.
Yeah, the guy that can get fired the easiest. A little misunderstanding there. The director's authority, and it's not even discretionary, is if the ATF bans any particular caliber as armor piercing.
You and I have already had this discussion.
The director shall permit the use of lead. It's not really in the law that way, but it's clear that they exempt from the provisions of this statute, I think, is the verbatim. So it's not about availability. It's only about an ATF ban. And so our director and 19 or so manufacturers have all written ATF and asked them to make a decision because the law allows them to exempt sporting arms or sporting calibers from that armor-piercing thing, but they won't move.
All right, there you have that answer, and we need to take another quick break right now. When we get back from this, more with our California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Don't go away. I got great questions still ahead.
And now, more California Sportsmen with Seth Hendrickson.
I've got some more questions here, one from Alan Fong. I got a couple from the listeners, too. But before we get into that, one of the most important memos came out not too long ago about the California Department of Fish and Wildlife asking property owners to report any waterfowl mortality or problems that they may see based on some of the diseases that are out there. So quickly, we've asked Dan Perigari to talk about the types of diseases and what you might be able to spot out there that the department is kind of hopeful that you'll be able to pass on some info.
Yeah, thanks, Seb. There's 2 main diseases that we see a lot. In fact, we see them all the time. One of them is botulism, which tends to be a warm weather phenomenon, and the other one is avian cholera, which tends to be a cold weather phenomenon. Both of these diseases are exacerbated when waterfowl are concentrated, which is exactly what we'd expect. So symptoms, on cholera is a very fast-striking disease. I've watched birds, coots, for example, walking across a field and fall over dead. So The only thing you're going to see there is lots of dead birds. Botulism acts a little slower, and it's often called western duck sickness or limp neck disease. And so as the early fall migration happens and guys that get water are flooding up and stuff, they might start seeing ducks that don't act right. And so our request is, one of the ways we think slows those diseases down is to pick up as many dead carcasses as we can, especially on the botulism size.
Now, what happens when the public starts picking up these things? I guess that's when we need to talk to Chief Carey on, isn't it?
Great. Thanks.
Hey, Chief, you might want to get your off of mute right now. Are you with us, Mike? He'll be with us in just a second. Are you there, Mike?
Yeah, I'm there.
Mike, if people start finding ducks laying around, or they're sick, or they got a limp neck, or some sort of paralysis, and they're still alive, what happens if they start taking them into possession?
Yeah, what I just suggest that if they're going to do that, that they call in to the department and say, hey, we're going to be collecting the birds, and then turn them over to us so that we have them, and they're not just hanging on to them. You know, as long as we know beforehand, there won't be any problem.
Yeah, that would be a smart move, folks, to notify them ahead of time, or you could be charged, I would imagine, with a full limit outside of season and probably lose a few things along the way, like guns, etc., not to mention some money when you go to court. So please notify them in advance if you're going to be doing any of this kind of stuff. It's a very important issue, and they're asking you guys to pay attention to what's going on out there. Well, let's change our discussion over to a little bit of fisheries right now and put Stafford Lair on the podium. And Stafford, I've got a couple quick questions here from guys. The first one I wanted to mention to you real quick is one of our listeners. He said, when fishing inland salmon and steelhead, can leader length, this is from Rick, by the way, be restricted? In other words, the distance between the hook and the attached weight. I could go on and read this whole thing, but I know you have been actively involved in pursuing this with many of the guides and fly fishermen in California. What about leader length? What is the discussions? Where are we at in that? Because a lot of people look at this leader length and flossing as poaching, just like I do, because that fish is not taking it. You're drawing it through their mouth, hopefully going to snag them. And a lot of people are even saying fly fishermen are some of the biggest violators when it comes to that. But that's my opinion and theirs. Stafford, what's going on with the flossing of salmon and steelhead in our rivers?
So in 2012, the commission directed us to take a look at salmon snagging statewide. And so what we've done is we've convened a working group to work through the issues. And I think it was very fortuitous that a group of professional guides came in. They're on the water all the time, respect their observations and opinions, and they came in with a recommendation to try to mitigate this effect. We can do anything we really want or recommend to the commission, gear restrictions. It's what is the right fit. And I think that that's what we're working through right now, whether we're looking at the American River, the Feather River, the Smith, or the Klamath. Flossing is an issue that we need to deal with, and we're working through it.
Now, I'm sure something will come out soon on that. One of the other questions, and this was from Ronnie Rogers. Ronnie said, thanks for the forum. My question is, with a ban of snares for sturgeon being that was put into place to protect oversized fish from being hoisted into the boat with sometimes 2 or 3 snares held for photos, would the department be willing to look at the use of snares again with the rule that all snared fish must remain in the water? And he specifically says snared by the tail instead for buoyancy.
I can't go there. The reason is that the use of snares is harmful to the large adult sturgeon.
It's harmful to the small one.
But the bigger fish are our most productive females, and we have there's direct evidence of aborting their egg clutches. And I would say this to fishermen: step up, be proactive, be the good sportsman that we all are. And, in fact, the department is responding to recommend to the commission to allow the larger dip nets to be used to facilitate the landing of the fish. So just like in the lead ammo thing, let's be out front in this and say let's do what's right. So I'm not the department's not going to entertain returning to snares.
Well, one of the other quick things that have been brought up was the filleting situation. Now, I know it's already been addressed, and this guy that sent in the question wondering what the deal is on filleting hasn't been a regular listener of California Sportsman. He would know this. Go ahead.
So we've heard the overwhelming outcry to allow for filleting, and in fact, we are recommending to the Commission that filleting be allowed on Chinook salmon. We will not allow it on steelhead, but we're looking at the Feather River, the American River, and the Sacramento River from Tower Bridge all the way upstream to Deschutes Road, and then that would permit people to legally fillet fish Chinook salmon. It will also deal with the addressing of guides as commercial processors, and Mike can speak to that.
Well, we're going to go right now to Mike Carrion, the chief of the game wardens for the state of California and Law Enforcement Division. Mike, are you with me?
I'm with you, Steph.
Can you answer Stafford's comment?
Yes, I did. And one of the things that, like Stafford said, we want to clarify is that we intend to have guides defined as commercial processors so that they can actually fillet those fish, out there on the river for the clients and make it easier for the fishermen.
Yeah, there was a lot of controversy about it, a lot of talk about it. They brought it to the department. The department realized it, and it all fell back to well, if we do this here, it started causing a domino effect in other areas too. So that's one of the things the department is always dealing with, is these opportunities to change something to make it better and having an impact elsewhere. Well, Mike, I appreciate that very much. One of the other quick questions was from Alan Fong, and anybody can respond to this one. The PCP air guns that are out there, they're now available in 30 to 50 caliber, and they're actually available for killing deer as well as hogs with pellets. Do you think these pellet guns will ever make it? I'm getting a lot of blank faces. They aren't aware of them yet. Get ready, guys. You're going to see it. Well, folks, I've got 20 more questions and 100 more of my own out here to ask. But I'll tell you what, we've had a great discussion, and we're running out of time fast here. I'd like to thank the Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'd like to thank the director, Chuck Bonham, for facilitating and making all of this happen. I'd love to take you guys out to breakfast after the show. Dan Paragary, the Deputy Director of Fishing and Wildlife. We've got Eric Loft, the Chief of the Wildlife Division, and Stafford Lair, the Chief of Fisheries Division, and the Chief of Law Enforcement, all joining us today. We thank you very much. You know we're going to be doing this again, guys. This is too good. It'll be 2 hours next time, so you can get it up an hour earlier. Till next week, this is Sep, everybody. Tight lines.